Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Again, as you heard from Teresa, she's not able to be here, so I'm here in her place. I'm Kemily, the Assistant Vice President of PACO. Today, we have a very special speaker for you. His name is James Edwell. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background of James. He has over 17 years experience in business development in the legal services sector and with DiscoverReady. He is actually a former paralegal providing e-discovery and trial support to partners at Burns, White, and Hickton in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Gray Robinson in Florida. He had also managed litigation for Westinghouse Corporation. He manages several of DiscoverReady's key client relationships in the eastern and midwestern U.S. And today, Mr. Edwell is going to be speaking to us about e-discovery and all the things you need to know about it. So let's welcome James.
Thank you, Camille.
Thank you.
So, I will dispute immediately one thing Kimberly said. I'm not that special. So let's keep that in mind. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to present. And I am a former paralegal, so I understand some of your pain and some of your challenges, and I understand how hard you work. One thing I'd like to say before we get started is, we have 18 to 22 slides. My goal is to give you some information that is going to be usable for you, as opposed to just running through a bunch of slides. So if I get on a subject that is near and dear to your heart, or you have some questions, while we'll have questions and answers if we have time at the end, I would rather you just stop me and let's make this interactive. I think that's going to be more fun than for everybody else than just hearing me drone on. So let me ask a question. Is anybody here in the business or in litigation in your daily activity? Anybody do litigation? One, two, well, most of you, okay. And does anybody know or work with e-discovery? Kinda. And one, okay. So this is going to be some new topics for everybody. Do we know what e-discovery stands for? Right. E-discovery is electronic discovery. I am a former paralegal, and I tell people that I've been doing this so long that I was involved before there was an E in e-discovery. When I was a paralegal, and I kind of bridged the gap between discovery and e-discovery. Most of my time as a paralegal was dealing with paper. As I was coming out of it, that's how I got out of being a paralegal into this field, because I started to learn e-discovery. Then I moved to a provider or a vendor and started to support the paralegals and the lawyers with the e-discovery product, and that's how I got into this role. All right, so let's talk about our agenda for today. We're going to do an overview of the electronic discovery reference model, which is the EDRM. We're going to talk about basically some rules of civil procedure and evidence governing electronically stored information, or what's more commonly known as ESI. Talk about the duty to preserve, get into legal hold strategy. We can talk, if you want, about the process of legal holds. Talk about the electronically stored information formats, how the data is stored, and the strategy to approach ESI. And finally, we'll get into a Q&A session if there's time. And we already are 10 minutes into the session, so we'll get going. EDRM. The EDRM reference model is, if you're not familiar with it, if you go to any conferences or anything, they're always talking about the EDRM. This is what they're talking about if you hear that. What it deals with is the total continuum of dealing with electronic discovery. That's what the EDRM means, Electronic Discovery Reference Model. Almost every vendor like DiscoverReady has their own, I won't call it version, but their own adaptation of the EDRM that supports the way they approach the business. But if you look at the left, on the left side where the shade, I don't know what colored shading over there, but the golden green color, to the further left, the issue that you're dealing with is the volume. And as you move further to the right, the volume decreases, but you start, instead of focusing on volume, as you move to the right, you're focusing on relevance. And as you see, that's why on the far right, the relevance is very high, because now you're talking about only those things that actually matter. On the far left, you're dealing with information management. How do you deal with the information? Where do you store it? And we'll get into some of those concepts in a minute. Then you move from information management to identification. We'll deal with all these. Preservation and collection. You see the relationship between the two and how it's an iterative relationship. Then you move into what's really going to cost you money when you call DiscoverReady, which is the processing, or any other vendor. I just happen to work for DiscoverReady. The processing, the review, the analysis, that's where your money is spent. Then the production is turning it over to the other side, and the presentation is what you need for court, for trial, or arbitration, whoever you have to present to. Any questions on that? Any comments on that? Has anybody seen the EDRM before? So some of you have some exposure to this reference model. Let's talk about the Information Governance Reference Model, the IGRM. Information governance, depending on what piece or part of the organization you're a part of, or your client is a part of, it affects what their concern is. And if you look at that, first of all, there has to be, the challenge of an organization is to get to a unified governance model, because there are competing interests. I guess I have to be still so that I can stay in camera, huh? All right. There are competing interests depending on what part of the business you're in. If you're in the business side, only thing, not the only thing, but the main thing you're concerned about are profits. And usually some of the rules drain on the profits, but your main focus is the profits. If you're in privacy and security, you're concerned about the risk. If you're in IT, you're concerned about the efficiency of what you're doing, right? And I'll tell you in a minute. If you're in records and information management, you're concerned about risk. If you're in legal, you're concerned about risk. Now, let me tell you how some of these things start to work against each other. If you're in IT security or in IT, you're talking about efficiency, okay? I got a lot of data to store. How can I store it efficiently? How can I get rid of data, because storing the data is expensive. If I don't need it, I want to get rid of it. But if you're in legal, you're concerned about the risk of getting rid of something that may be potentially, and we'll talk about the requirements of legal hold, you're concerned about, you can't get rid of that Mr. IT guy because we may need that for potential litigation. Mr. IT guy says, hey, I got 20 terabytes of information you haven't touched in 6 years. And he says, yeah, because we're holding that for potential litigation. And that's where the efficiency of IT starts to challenge the risk associated with legal. Business has their same challenges, and all of these, that's why the challenge is to come up with a unified governance policy. And legal, everybody, all the stakeholders have to have a seat at the table to figure out what's going to work for this particular business. And it's not always the same scenario. Every company has their own versions of what's going to work and what's not. But governing their information is a major issue, and it's becoming more and more major. One thing I wanted to say, as paralegals or legal assistants, it's not our job, and I'll refer to myself as still one of you, it's not our job to manage these risks or to make rules and to advise the client, but it's our job to understand them, so when our attorney comes to us and asks us to participate on calls or participate in the process, we understand what they're talking about, right? But nobody here has an obligation to be instructing the client because we're not lawyers, right? Okay. Identification. Identification is the process of locating potential sources of ESI. All right? It is the process by which, once you find out that something is brewing, where can that information be? Now, there's two forms of this identification. I may be getting ahead of myself, but first of all, you develop a strategy and a plan, an identification strategy and plan. There's a couple of ways of doing this. There's two. They will have your attorney and the client will participate in what they call custodial interviews. Custodial interviews means, well, that's one part of it. But you'll usually go to the IT department and say, here's what the case is about. Where's this information reside? It's on hard drives, you have emails, you have servers, all of these pieces of information. What does it contain? Where does the information be? That's a general IT interview, but you also will need to conduct a custodial interview where you talk to the potential custodians, the people that actually have the relevant information. And there are two components to the custodial interview. First of all, there is the relevance custodial interview, which the attorney will need to explain, this is what the case is about. These are the materials, types of materials that are relevant that we're looking for. Do you have this information? Secondarily, you'll need to figure out, and you'll hear phrases like data mapping, where is the information? Okay, so first of all, does a person identify as a potential custodian? Yes, I have information. Secondarily, does the person know where the information is? So you have identified where the information exists. Any questions on that? I'm not going to just read these slides for you. I'm going to give you my personal insight of it because you can read. Now, once you have identified the information, there is a major responsibility to preserve. Preserve means to maintain the information in case it is necessary. That's the simplest way of putting it. Once you've identified where the potential information is, now there are times where you may identify just broad sources of information and you haven't even gotten to the custodial interviews yet, but you just understand that this may come up, so I'm going to put this server into preservation mode. I'm going to put Kimberly's data into preservation mode. We haven't talked to her yet, but I know enough about the case as the CEO or the chief legal officer, the general counsel, the litigation manager. I know enough to know these are my key people. And if you work with companies that get sued a lot, they have a list of people. Every time they get sued, that person's stuff goes on hold. And that person's stuff gets preserved. All right? You have to figure out what is your preservation method. How are you going to preserve it? Are you going to preserve it on hard drives? Are you going to preserve it just as data in place? In other words, you're just not going to touch it. You're going to keep it spinning like it already is. Are you going to, if it's getting old, are you going to download it and put it on a durable hard drive? How are you going to preserve it? How are you going to protect it? This key component here is do you need to put in an order to suspend destruction? Do you need to tell certain people that your data now goes on legal hold, you can't delete anything anymore? Do you need to tell the IT department, these lists of people, when they quit, we have to preserve their computers. We have to make sure we get a copy of their hard drives because this case is they are a potential custodian for a potential case, and we can't be in a situation where we deleted their hard drive. And so some companies have very sophisticated policies of what to do with people when they leave the organization. All right. Then you have to execute the preservation plan. It's very important that the plan is being executed. It's very important that if you're talking to a client and you're hearing deviations in the plan. Well, for custodian A, well, he left and we downloaded his hard drive, but that's not what we usually do. We got lucky this time. We caught him before he deleted everything, but the other 7 people, 2 of them we got, 5 of them we didn't. That should raise a red flag, danger, Will Robinson, because you don't have a consistent preservation plan. There has to be a plan that's being followed. Collection. Collection is the process of once you have received the data, preserved the data, you don't collect until it's needed, right? It starts to get very costly now because you don't collect until you're going to need to send it somewhere. Collection is the process of taking the data that's preserved and gathering it into a format that it can be delivered or used for litigation. That's what collection is. Let me talk a little bit about collection. First of all, you develop a collection strategy, prepare a collection plan. Collection strategy means, okay, I've identified my custodians, all right? So I know who the people are that I need to collect from. I've identified my sources. My sources could be a custodian, it could be a server location, it could be databases that are offline, it could be a server that's no longer functioning. It could be a backup tape. What are my sources? What do I need to collect from? So you got to identify what you need to collect from. You develop a plan. You select a collection method. For these larger corporations, there are sophisticated tools like Encase and FTK and all of these tools that will do the collection for them. Right? All they have to do is identify where the location is, and it will do what they call pull the data and collect it for them. All right? Sometimes you'll have to go to places and you'll have to hire a company. If there are laptops that need to be collected, that they need to do a forensic copy of the hard drives. That could be part of a collection strategy, where they say, okay, everybody, this is old school, but it used to be everybody, I participated in a project like this where we had to show up, and I showed up with a forensic specialist, and everybody had to bring their laptop, sign it in. We downloaded, did the forensic copy. They came back in an hour or 2 and signed it back out. That could still happen. That is rare today, because now most people's laptops are required to be connected to the network. If it's connected to the network, it can be collected remotely, right? So we could tap into it. A collection company could tap into it. Your IT department can tap into it and just pull the information directly. A lot of times you could pull the information. Most times you could pull the information without the person even knowing you're pulling the information. Most companies do give their people a heads up, but you would be surprised some stuff that end up in the collection that people should not have on their laptops. Companies are not responsible for collecting all information. I want to introduce a phrase. Instead of all, I want to replace it with reasonable. You're not expected to do everything. You're not expected to do all. You're expected to have things that are reasonable. Your standard is reasonableness. Not everything, not all. Everybody understands that something can be missed. As long as your process is defined and defensible, you'll typically be okay. All right? So, that's why the drafter of this presentation said companies are not responsible for collecting all information, just taking steps that are reasonable given the totality of the circumstances. That's why you develop a strategy, you prepare the collection plan, you select a method, and you execute the collection plan. One thing else I want to say about collection. Collection is also a process of putting something in a transferable format. What am I saying? When you're looking at your email, you see individual emails on your desk. You get an email, you click it, you open it, you read it, right? When you collect that data, you're not collecting the email that's open and readable. What you're doing is you're putting the email into a container, which is typically called a PST file. That makes the email information transferable. So all of your email goes into a PST file and becomes a container of your email, and it contains the information about every piece of email. The date it was sent, who it was sent to, the time, and all the other pieces of more pieces of what's called metadata. Everybody know what metadata is? All right, metadata is data about data. That's what metadata means. It's information about information. It's data about data. And it contains all pieces of information. Most pieces of metadata, no one ever gets into it. There's over 100 pieces of metadata on every electronic file, more than you ever know. But the basic ones are the to, the from, the date sent for emails, the date received, when it was opened, all of that piece of information. But you're putting it into a container for it to be collected, all right? And once it's collected, then it can be transferred. Loose files don't go into its own type of container. That goes into some type of a zip file or one of those types of containers, okay? Any questions, comments? Yes, Kim.
In your past life as a paralegal, how did you handle ESI? Did you have to directly handle them yourself?
In my past life as a paralegal, like I said, I got out of paralegal right as ESI was becoming vogue. The most I dealt with was I did a lot of trial presentation. We did a lot of scanning and tiffing of paper. That can, and then you generated the electronic stuff. When I was a project manager, then I was working with clients to manage their ESI and helping them with their collection strategies and all of that. So I was kind of at the birth of the ESI movement. Yes, any questions? Any more questions? Processing. Now, processing is typically, not all the time, some firms deal with it themselves, some firms deal with companies that do it like DiscoverReady and and the competitors, my competitors. Processing, remember, that's why I concluded with this on collection. Remember, I said collection was the process by which you took the data and put it into a container and made the data transferable. Processing now is opening up that container, getting all the information about what's in that container, reapplying it to the individual documents, and then somehow making those documents available for somebody to do something with. That's what it means in the most simplistic form. So you send, I won't keep using DiscoverReady because I don't want to make this a marketing piece because that's not what it's about. So your firm, you go from XYZ Corporation and you take it to your IT guy, and you may have summation in-house, and you say, okay, here is custodian A and custodian B. Here's the data they sent me. They will take that, pop it into the system, and what they'll do is they'll open up that container. Instead of you seeing the container, you'll see the individual emails, the individual Word docs, individual Excel files. That will be your sign that the data has been processed. That's what processing is. It's converting the data from container format back to it's not its original format, because it won't look like it looked on the screen, but it'll be individual files that'll be readable and something you'll be able to do something with. When you do that, though, to process it effectively, you have to reattach or keep the metadata with the individual file, because now you'll want to know, when was this document created? When was it last modified? Who sent it? Who was the creator? Who received the email? How many other people received the email, right? So that's why the processing is so critical, because you're going to be making decisions based upon the information that you get. If you're working in-house with your own IT guy, if you're working with a provider like DiscoverReady, you want to make sure that you understand how they're processing the data, right? What methods are they using? What tools are they using? Are you getting everything? Is every file accounted for? That's what this exception, it says validate, output, and exception handling. All right? There should be a report that you're able to see that says I received 5 containers. Those 5 containers had 700 files within the 5 containers, and you could see which file was attached in every container. Then what's in with every file, do I have a copy of every file? Is every file accounted for? You have to make sure it is. All right? If it's not, why isn't it? That's what exception handling is for. Some files don't process. If it doesn't process, you need a report as to why it didn't process. This could become very important downstream in the litigation once you make your production. If somebody's doing a gap analysis of a production that says this exists, what happened to the file that was attached to this email, and you don't know what happened to it, you can get a spoliation charge. So it becomes very important to keep track of every file. You know, I'm not asking you to memorize what happened. It's just a very quick check to say, okay, we received 700 files, 657 of them were rendered, and we were able to see them, we were able to read them. 43 of them didn't process. Here's the reason why. Okay, that's you just have to have that accounting. You have to know who's responsible for exception reporting. Who in the company? Is it you as the paralegal? Now, this is something that may fall to you as the paralegal, the litigation assistant, or maybe the associate you're working with, to make sure every file is accounted for. All right? The partner's not going to do that. But the partner's going to be the one in the deposition that gets to question what happened to this file. Yes?
What are some examples of some reasons why a document would not come through?
Very good question. First of all, some files are just corrupt. The process of time of them sitting on a computer, some files, and the transfer of data, some files are just corrupt and don't process. Some files could be password protected, and it's somebody that no longer works with the company. And even though companies like us have password cracking tools, that's really nothing but a password cracking tool is nothing but a conglomeration of millions and millions of password combinations, and if you can't hit it, you can't open the file. So it could be a password protected file. You no longer have that person to get the password, and it's not open. It could be a file type that software no longer exists. It could be a very old file, and software no longer exists to render a version of that file. Those are 3 examples right there. It could be a system file, right, that comes from a proprietary system of a company, and they no longer support that system. So there are various reasons. And as long as you understand it and you have a reasonable explanation, and you're not trying to, I'm using you as a generic word, not anybody in this room, but if you are not trying to hide or obfuscate data, you'll be okay. But you need to understand this is the reason why this wasn't rendered. And, you know, sometimes you could get challenged and they could say, well, send it to me and see if they could open it. But you'd have to be able to figure out. And I know in our company, our exception reporting is very detailed. You can go back and say, we sent you a file 3 years ago. It was connected to this. It was an attachment to this email. It did not open. I need that file, and we could find it. The purpose of processing also is to reduce. One of the purposes, I talked about the converting ESI, which means taking it from the container and putting it, you know, making it readable and usable again. But also one of the functions of processing is to reduce the volume, or to dedupe. Does everybody know who doesn't know what deduplicate means? Deduplicate means to remove duplicates. That's what dedupe means. The phrase is dedupe. The long word is deduplicate. All right? That means to remove duplicates. It means to remove exact duplicates. It doesn't mean to remove like documents. All right, let me give you the difference between the two. The email that Kimberly sent to everybody about this session today, okay? The copy of that email in everybody's email box is considered a duplicate because it was sent by one person, it was received by multiple people. That is a duplicate. If we process and you ask us to dedupe that, only one email will remain. The other emails will not do what's called move forward, or we will not keep it. All right? Only one of them will remain. Now the question is, and maybe somebody's thinking this, I can see it in your eyes, which one will remain? The answer to that is the one you tell us to. Okay? So we'll ask you, and I sit on calls all the time, we ask this question, any vendor worth their salt will ask, what is the custodial priority? Whose email is prominent? Who's the most important? Is it most important that Dan's copy of the email remains, Kimberly's copy of the email remains, and we'll put in what is called a dedupe order. And if that person's email will be dominant, if they have it, it stands. Everybody else's will become a secondary email source, but we'll always keep track of who had the email. You'll never lose track of how many people were on the email. You'll see it visually, but there will also be a field that contains that information. It's called a dedupe field, or whatever. It could be called different things, but for us, that's what it's called. Okay, so, but there's two ways to dedupe data, deduplication of data. You can dedupe within a custodial source or across the entire collection. Within a custodial source means I'm only deduping your emails against your emails. So if you have the double copies of an email, I will dedupe and only put that one copy in there. If I do it across the entire population of collected data, then I'm deduping everybody's emails against everybody. That's the most common way of doing it. There's reasons you would only dedupe within a source, but that doesn't reduce your data volume a lot. So most people dedupe across the entire collection. 20 people collected, I'm deduping all 20 people's emails against each other, all people's e-docs against each other. If you all have this copy of the same contract, that would dedupe against. However, if you have a copy of the contract on your desk from Tuesday, and then you edited one word of it, and you sent it, and you saved it Wednesday, that's not going to dedupe because it's a different file. All right? Even if you didn't, matter of fact, even if you didn't dedupe a word and you saved it as a separate file, it's not going to dedupe because the last date modified is not going to, it's going to be different. Okay? All right. Let's move on. We're running out of time here. Document review or review. This is the most time-consuming, costly process in the EDRM model. Simplistically, this is somebody sitting down, reading documents, and making decisions about whether or not those documents have relevance in the case. That's basically what the review process is. Various companies do it, various firms do it differently. I know companies that have their own review team set up because they have so many, they get sued so much they hire their own attorneys and they do it. I know law firms that hire staffs of attorneys and they do it. There are law firms that hire people like us. There are companies that directly hire people like us and then tell the law firm, you're working with DiscoverReady, or you're working with Epic, or you're working with these other companies because we have a contract, a master services agreement with them, and they do all of our review. But that is a process of somebody actually reading the documents, making decisions about what this document says, is it going to be helpful or not for the litigation. You need to develop a strategy and a plan. Who's going to do it? Where is it going to be done? What is the protocol that is going to be used? All of that. The protocol means what are the people reviewing the documents going to refer to make their decisions? Right? What is, how, when starting a review, the people need to know this is what makes a document responsive. This is what makes it privileged. This is what makes it confidential. These are the issues that it pertains to. You want everybody playing from the same sheet of music. What you don't want is a lot of subjectivity in the review process. You want it to be objective as possible, even though you cannot remove subjectivity, but you want an objective standard so that you know that everybody's working from the same sheet of music. You set up a review room. Security, one thing that has changed over the last 5 to 10 years is the intense security surrounding e-discovery. It is massive. Companies like DiscoverReady have to go through intense security protocols, have to live by intense security protocols. We have to go through intense security reviews by financial organizations, pharmacy companies. Everybody has their own set of standards. There's a master set of standards that people use, but everybody tweaks it for their own needs. One of the areas where security is so heavy is the review room. That's why it says set up a review room. We are required to have almost everybody that we do review for, we're required to have separate review rooms for every case that we're working on. Even if we're working on two different cases for the same company, they still want the rooms separate. That's why it's not, it's not something slight that it says set up a review room, right? Because everybody wants their security to be paramount. DiscoverReady, I think our security is a little better, but it's not unique that these requirements are being asked for. Some companies require you to have biometric readings to get into the room, or key card access only to get into the rooms. This is very important. So to set up the review room is extremely important. Set up the training. All right? Who's going to train? Who's going to train is critically important. It usually is your most experienced person. Some companies require the partner to do it. A lot of companies some companies require the law firm partner to do it. Some allow their senior associates to do it. But it has to be somebody with a legal knowledge of the case. Very rarely, sometimes as a paralegal, you may be asked to attend the training. I've never seen a situation where the paralegal was asked to conduct the training. A legal assistant was asked to conduct the training. Perform data analysis workflow. Conduct a review. Perform a data analysis workflow means how is the data coming in, okay? What is the way the review is going to be conducted, all right? Are there going to be batches? How many documents per batch is going to be? Who's going to assign those batches? Who's going to keep track of the batches when they're done? Who's going to QC the process? That's what all of that means, the workflow. What is going to be the quality control protocol? All of that needs to be designed and worked out, okay? Gone are the days where you just grab a box and start sitting down and reviewing documents with Post-it notes, okay? Those days are gone. You got to have a process because your process can be challenged. Everything we're saying, at the end of the day, once that production goes to the other side, if you have not put forth a solid process, anywhere you get challenged, your process could fall apart. So you need to know, for example, batch 1 through 10 was assigned to Sam. And Sam did batch 1 through 10, but of the 10 batches, Harry QC'd the first 5, Sally QC'd the last 5, okay? Of the 5 that were QC'd, Sam had 20 overturned. You got to track all this stuff. You have to know, because what if somebody, at the end of the day, somebody produces a document that's privileged? You need to know who reviewed that document, who made the decision to let this document out the door, how did it get out the door? You have to have processes that are traceable and trackable. Then you conduct but it's too late. Let me say this. It's too late to design the plan once you've started to review. The horse is out of the barn. And you'll spend the rest of your time trying to review documents, chasing down, well, who did this? Who did that? Where did this document come from? How did this happen? Who said this is responsive? This isn't what they told me. The horse is out of the barn then. You're going to have enough questions while the review is going on. So you have to make sure you have a solid process. Then you have to make sure you have a plan to evaluate. At the end of the day, you have to be able to track and trace everything you've done, all right? Evaluate. Has every document on the system been reviewed? Has every document been accounted for? If it hasn't been reviewed, why hasn't it been reviewed? Did we make a decision not to review? For example, you may make a decision that, and we don't have time to get into all this, but you may make a decision that all emails from a particular domain, from a particular company or domain, so-and-so.com, doesn't get reviewed. So when you go to run your production protocol, run your production, we'll talk about that in a minute, you got to make sure you've highlighted why this document is in there, why it's not in there, because you're going to check. One of the things you determine is everything that has been reviewed, does it have a decision attached to it? If it doesn't, why not? That's what it's talking about, saying evaluate your plan, wrap up. Did I review what I meant to review? Did I track what I was trying to track? Do I know what I did and why I did it? Okay? Questions? Any questions, comments? Analysis. This basically is saying, before I start sending something out the door, did we screw this up or did we get it right? I mean, that's the cleanest way of putting it, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation as a paralegal, as a project manager, and as a provider where everything was fine until the production went to the other side. And you started realizing, uh-oh, there's a privileged document in there. Uh-oh, we missed somebody. So if it doesn't show up in the production, it'll show up in a deposition. And what you don't want to do as a paralegal, and if you have any document management responsibility, and as a paralegal I had tremendous document management responsibility, you don't ever want to let your attorney get surprised by a document. That's rule number one. If it's supposed to be there, make sure it's there. If it's not supposed to be there, make sure it's not. If something shows up that went through your hands, and went through your hands is becoming more and more of a general term with millions of documents, right? And so went through your hands doesn't necessarily mean you actually touched it, tasted it, and felt it, but it meant it went through your process that you were in charge of. You got to make sure that you know what happened to this document, that you can trace it, you can go back. That's what this analysis is. Make sure you understand the facts, the circumstances, and potential evidence in the litigation, and make sure you understand the process. And I would submit to every paralegal that's listening to me that it's much more your responsibility to make sure you understand the process, because that's what you're going to be leaned on the most for. Yes, you need to understand the facts of the case, and the simple curiosity is going to take care of that for you, right? You have an exciting case, interesting case, documents are showing up, that's going to really lead you to spur your knowledge of the case and make sure you understand the fact pattern, the content. But what you're really going to be leaned on for is to make sure you understand the process that was employed in the data and the whole process that we use. Questions, comments? Now, notice how we said make sure you understand what was done before you start producing data. Because once you let it out the door, you're at the mercy of what you've already done. Yes, there are clawback agreements, but let me tell you from experience, nobody likes to use them. Does everybody know who doesn't know what a clawback agreement is? So everybody knows what a clawback is. Nobody likes to use a clawback agreement. I always took it personally responsible if anything that went through my possession had to be clawed back. As a paralegal, it never happened to me. As a project manager for a client, it did happen to me on a very bad situation. And I don't work for that company anymore. But it happened to me in a very bad situation where I was a project manager. I was staying up very late at night to perform a production. And I sent, this is going to set the basis for my story on production. I sent my production script or my production description to the IT guy, to the person, because this was back in the day before we as the project managers were able to design your own scripts, right? But at some point I said, this is what needs to be produced, and I sent him the details. He inverted something. And so instead of excluding privileged documents, he included privileged documents. Right? I almost lost my mind because I was staying there late one night, and fortunately for me, I caught it. Not before it went out the door, but I caught it before the client did. That was my only saving grace, and the client really liked me, and that person was dealt with not kindly, but that's what I'm saying. The production script, you have to be careful. What is a production script? That is when you decide what's going out the door, right? So you make a decision of, and it usually says everything that's responsive, not privileged. That's the two basic components for a production script. Everything that is responsive and not privileged, and you could have some other criteria. Maybe they only want to do, sometimes people get real fancy. I don't want to produce this yet. So anything within this date range I'm ready to produce, but I'm going to hold the rest. Or anything that was reviewed already, we can produce, but we're doing rolling production, so we have to make sure that it has what we refer to as a major category. It's produced, it's responsive, it has its issues, it has a privilege call. Can somebody tell me in a situation where a document would be responsive and privileged and still produced? It's a trick question. That's when a document is privileged, but it's privilege redacted. So it's responsive, it's privileged, but it's privilege redacted, so we're going to redact out the privilege content because we can't withhold the entire document, but we'll withhold the part that is redactable, and we'll produce the rest. So you got to understand these things because you have to be able to make sure that what your client needs to go out the door is going out the door. You have to identify, that's what I meant by identify the production requirements. Prepare the files. Oh, we're almost out of time. Prepare the files. In other words, that's not going to be done by you mostly. If it's a smaller case, it might. But preparing the files, converting it, it's a bunch of conversion. You convert it to collect it, then you convert it again to review it, then you convert it again to produce it. Right? You convert it from sitting on somebody's desk, you put it in a container, that's a conversion. Then you convert it from sitting in a container to making it viewable, that's a conversion. Then you decide, okay, these are the 28 documents or 2,800 or 28,000 I'm going to produce. Then you convert that to what I refer to as a lockdown format. It's a TIFF or a PDF. Why do you want to do that? Who can tell me why you want to convert it?
Can't be altered.
Right, so it can't be altered. What you don't want to do is produce a bunch of Word documents to somebody, and they say, I don't like that fact, so they'll just go in and change it. Now they say, well, lawyers are ethical. They're not supposed to do that. Okay, but who wants to trust one? Right? No, you want to make sure that exactly, and you know what? Something can happen inadvertently. You know, maybe they're reviewing it and they hit a space and they delete a very important word. No, you want to lock down that format so you can guarantee your attorney the document that we produced, the document that the other side is looking at is the exact document that we received. We know it. We have the format locked down. Then you copy files to media. Got to be honest, not a lot of files are being copied to media anymore. Most productions are being done by FTP. Who knows what FTP stands for? FTP is, you about to say?
It's the file transfer protocol.
Absolutely. File transfer protocol. Now, quite frankly, nobody will use an FTP anymore. It has to be an SFTP, Secure File Transfer Protocol. So if somebody's sending you data and, you know, it's not on a secure transfer protocol, you need to have them change that, and you probably need to go to somebody else because they're not protecting the security of your client's data. It needs to be a secure file transfer protocol. Yes?
So when you say media, you mean like CDs or like flash
Right.
drives or something?
You know, back in the day means a couple years ago. Everything had to be copied to a hard drive and mailed out and FedExed out, or copied to a DVD and FedExed out, right? 5-10 years ago, that's what everybody's doing. Very rarely is anything being, in large litigation. Some litigations, you know, smaller stuff, they're still putting on CDs and DVDs, but when you're dealing with large cases, people are doing rolling productions, and they're putting it on the secure FTP. They're sending credentials, and all they have to do is basically secure file transfer protocol is I'm putting this data in a zip folder in a location, in a cloud location, and then I'm giving you credentials to access that location. When you get the credentials, you can access it and download it. So I'm uploading and you're downloading. It's the same thing as your Amazon account where you keep your music. It's just a lot more secure and a lot more important, right? Amazon, you keep your music there until you want to download it, and you download it. It's the same principle, all right? It is $12.59. So just go to one. Okay. Real quick, and we can wrap up. Presentation. Presentation is, I always thought presentation was the fun part of paralegal work, because this is when you really got it, you know, and when I ended up my paralegal career, this is when presentation software was really getting in vogue, and I remember working on a trial, and I had to walk my boss through on how, you know, how the documents were going to display, and he was amazed, and you know, and we had to do several run-throughs as, okay, so when I'm interviewing this, when I'm cross-examining this person, these are the files I want and documentation I want, all right? There are several trial presentation software, pieces of trial presentation software out there. That's just preparing for deposition. Not so much used in depositions, usually you're passing paper around, but arbitration and trial, where you're presenting data in a very dynamic situation. That's when you get to edit the documents. When I say edit, I'm not talking about edit content, I'm talking about edit the appearance of the document. Where that's when, you know, you'll see red boxes around the part and arrows pointing to things that people want to highlight, and yellow highlight, and you know, some of them have the document behind it with the pulled out paragraph that they're looking for. All of that stuff. That's what presentation is all about. All right. So my time is up. You have any questions, comments? I hope I didn't bore you. I didn't see anybody fall asleep, but maybe you slept with your eyes open. Yes.
I just have one about a general information holding period. We've heard the term
They can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I thought I'd hurry up. The term should have known, or how long generally do you hold the information?
Yeah, and we didn't get to that, but I can talk about it briefly. That's a whole requirement when it comes to legal holds. And what you're talking about is the phrase knew or should have known. And generally, and remember, I'm not an attorney, but I've worked in this area a lot, so I know a little. I don't know as much as an attorney would know. Just let me say that as a protection. But generally, you have a legal requirement to hold something when there's reasonable anticipation of litigation. And that's where the knew or should have known comes in, okay? Where you knew or should have known that there was a reasonable anticipation of litigation.
So
All right.
information isn't held just for like mandatory, customary.
But that comes into records and information management, and certain industries have their own requirements. Like financial industry, certain types of records have to be held for 5 years. In pharma, certain research data has to be held for a certain amount of time. That's your basic overall records management policy. There is no litigation rule, legal rule that says all documents must be held for 10 years in case you get sued. No, it's a loose, reasonable standard of knew or should have known. If you knew you were getting sued or you should have known you're getting sued, you got to hold on to the information. But there's no requirement to say, boy, this looks suspicious. I'm going to hold on to this document. All right? Matter of fact, a lot of, well, let me just not say that. But there's no requirement for you to do a self-interpretation of this could be fishy, I'm going to hold on to it, or I'm going to hold on to this in case. No, it's a reasonable standard whether you knew or should have known. Now remember, I'm not an attorney, so any attorney can correct me, but this is my understanding of the rule. And legal hold gets into, how are you going to hold the data? And one other thing on that is, there are some companies that have a very strict email policy, right? Where you can't keep email over 30 days. You can't keep email over 90 days or 6 months or a year. You're not required, even if you're a company that gets sued, you're not required to say, I'm just unilaterally changing that policy. If you have a legally defensible records retention policy that says, we don't save email over 90 days, then you don't have to save email over 90 days. Unless you now know that you are now a subject of a potential litigation. You can't hide behind, well, yeah, we knew he was about to be sued, but we don't save email over 90 days. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hope I didn't bore you to death.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you, James. That was really informative. I just have a couple of announcements. For all of our PACO members, if you haven't yet already, you should have received emails as a member to vote on the proposed Fourth Amendment bylaw changes. And just to give you a quick understanding of what the changes are, is that we are wanting to have a staggered terms of our election for the president, assistant vice president, secretary. They shall be nominated and elected in odd-numbered years. And then the treasurer and vice president shall be nominated and elected in even-numbered years. And the reasoning behind that was so that we can ensure we have experienced board members at all times, just to help keep things in good flow. So if you haven't yet already, please check your email from PACO and click on the link for SurveyMonkey. It takes only like 1 minute of your time. and then that'll help us, with that. And then we have more other speakers coming up later throughout the year. In November, we have Paul Unger with Affinity Consulting. He's going to talk to you about how to manage your workload, which is very important as a paralegal. So stay tuned to that. You'll see emails, and we'll have other speakers in October and December. And one more thing, in October, we have our October PACO Boo event coming up. I believe it's October the 26th, but check your emails for that. It'll be an after-work event at 10 Pin Alley. Last time we tried to have our event there, but unfortunately there was a power outage. But so again, we invite you to come out there, and it'll be a good time. And then if you have any final questions, let me know. And then people that are doing it online, if you have any questions, if you could just type your questions real quick. And then if you don't, thank you very much.